Welcome, friends. I'm the sleepy storyteller, here to guide you into a world where the night is both mysterious and soothing. If you're looking for a tale to ease your mind and carry you away, you've come to the right place. Relax, get comfortable, and let the story take you to places both strange and familiar. It's time to drift off into a world of imagination. Let the journey begin. I never believed in ghosts, not truly. I'd heard the stories, of course. Stories told around campfires or whispered late at night when the power went out, stories of restless spirits and haunted places. But I always thought they were just that, stories. Fabrications meant to frighten the curious. I had no reason to believe otherwise. That was until I moved into the old house on Ashwood Lane. The real estate listing had described it as charming, cozy, and full of character. And it was, in a way. The ivy-clad walls and the old wooden floors spoke of a time long past. A time when families filled the rooms with laughter and warmth. But when I walked through the front door for the first time, something lingered in the air. A heaviness that I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was just the years of dust, the creaky bones of a house aging far too gracefully. I was wrong. It wasn't until the first night that I truly understood. I had just finished unpacking the last of my boxes, settling into the quiet solitude of my new home. The house was peaceful, nestled in the small town that seemed to have forgotten time. The kind of town where everyone knew each other's names and no one locked their doors at night. A place where nothing really ever seemed to happen. The kind of place people moved to for peace and quiet. And that's exactly what I needed. I had no plans that evening. I made a cup of tea and settled into the old armchair by the window, watching the last hints of sunset disappear behind the trees. The wind outside was soft, gentle, and the rustling leaves seemed to lull me into a comfortable trance. My eyes grew heavy, and I let the room envelop me in its warmth. But as the light faded, so did the comfort. A soft creak echoed from upstairs. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat. It was probably just the house settling, I told myself. The old beams and floorboards often made sounds like that, especially when the temperature dropped. I took another sip of my tea and tried to shake off the unease creeping along my spine. But then came another sound. This one was quieter, almost imperceptible. A faint shuffle like someone walking barefoot across the floor. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. My mind raced. Could it be a neighbor? No, the house was far too secluded. It wasn't just the house settling, it was something else. Something alive. I set my cup down, my hands shaking. There it was again, a soft shuffle, closer this time. I slowly stood up, my eyes drawn to the staircase at the far end of the room. The shadows clung to the wooden steps, stretching across the floor like dark fingers. The house was silent again, almost too silent. I felt an odd pull toward the stairs, a quiet compulsion I couldn't explain. It was as if the house itself was beckoning me, urging me to come closer. Slowly I stepped forward. The moment my foot touched the first stair, I heard it again. A low whisper, barely audible, just beneath the creaking of the wood. Come closer. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. The voice was soft, but it carried a strange, unmistakable weight. It was a voice that felt as though it had been waiting for years, maybe even centuries, to be heard. And now it was calling me. I stepped back, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The voice lingered in the air, like a lingering fog. For a moment I thought I imagined it. I tried to convince myself that it was the wind, or perhaps the house itself, sighing in the night. But deep down I knew better. The whispers started to grow low and insistent. The voices were too faint to make out, but there were more now. Whispers like echoes of a forgotten time, all coming from the upstairs. Come closer. This time it was more urgent. I backed away from the stairs, my heart racing, but the pull was stronger. The voices, they wanted me to go up there. I felt my feet move without my permission, drawing me toward the staircase. The whispers grew louder. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the railing, and as I took another step, the temperature in the room dropped. The air became heavy, thick with a presence that I couldn't explain. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Suddenly, I heard it again, closer this time, almost right behind me. Stay with us. I spun around, my breath shallow. But there was no one there. The room was as empty as it had been when I first arrived. Only the shadows seemed to stir, shifting in the corners as if watching, waiting. I turned back to the staircase, the air thick with an unnerving stillness. The shadows seemed to stretch longer now, their edges curling like smoke in the dim light. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat, thudding in my chest like a drumbeat that echoed through the walls. I stood at the foot of the stairs for what felt like an eternity, frozen between the unknown and the quiet comfort of the room behind me. The soft whispering started again, but this time it wasn't distant. It wasn't from above. It was coming from all around me, 1,000 voices muffled by the walls themselves, calling out in unison. But no words, just the sound of a low, distant murmur, like a chant carried on the wind. Stay with us. I felt the words settle deep within me, sinking into my bones, wrapping around my heart, tightening their grip. Stay, just a little longer. The pull was unbearable now, as if some invisible force had wrapped its fingers around my chest, drawing me closer to the stairs. I took a hesitant step forward, the creaking of the wood beneath my feet sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Another step, then another. The whispers grew clearer, almost frantic now, like a tide of voices all calling to me at once. I glanced back over my shoulder, but the room behind me was empty, still. Only the flickering shadows remained. The stairs rose in front of me, their worn wooden surfaces gleaming faintly in the dim light. I reached for the railing, my hand trembling, my fingers cold as they brushed against the old wood. The air felt heavier now, thick with something I couldn't name. It was as if the house itself was breathing, exhaling a silent, expectant breath. The second step creaked louder than the first, a groan of old wood that echoed through the stillness. I hesitated, standing on the edge of the stairway, my mind clouded with uncertainty. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee back to the safety of the living room, but the whispers, no, they weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices calling to me, urging me on. Come closer. And so I did. I continued up the stairs, my feet dragging like lead, each step feeling heavier than the last. The shadows twisted as I ascended, reaching out from the walls like tendrils, caressing my skin with cold fingers. The temperature seemed to drop further with each step, until I could see my breath misting in the air. The top of the stairs was shrouded in darkness. The hallway stretched out before me, the door at the end of the corridor slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. It was the same door that had been locked when I'd first moved in, a door I hadn't thought much of. But now it felt different. There was a presence behind it, something waiting. I knew I had to open it. As I reached the end of the hallway, I hesitated again. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a silence so thick it was suffocating. My pulse raced as I stood before the door, the handle cold against my palm. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, shallow and uneven, as I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike any I had expected. It was small, a simple bedroom with faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. A lone lamp stood in the corner, its light dim and flickering. But it wasn't the room itself that made my breath catch. It was the painting that hung on the wall across from me. It was a portrait of a family. At first, it looked like any other family portrait. 2 parents, a boy and a girl, all of them smiling brightly, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. But as my eyes lingered on the painting, something began to feel wrong. Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too dark. The boy's hand was positioned unnaturally at his side, fingers curled tightly like he was gripping something. Someone. I stepped closer, unable to look away from the unsettling image. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the shadows growing deeper, wrapping around the edges of the painting. That's when I noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible movement in the background of the painting. The figure in the corner, an old woman, half obscured by shadow, was watching me. No, not watching. Waiting. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to run, to leave this room and never return, but I couldn't. My feet were frozen to the floor, my eyes locked onto the painting as if something unseen was compelling me to stay. And then it happened. The painting shifted. The family's eyes, those dark, empty eyes, moved, slowly at first, then all at once. They fixed on me as if they knew I was there, as if they had been waiting for me all along. The woman in the corner raised her hand, and with a silent, slow gesture, beckoned me forward. My stomach lurched. I could feel the air grow heavier, like something pressing down on me from all sides, suffocating me. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. The whispers began again, louder this time, swirling around me like an angry storm, their words indecipherable, lost in a cacophony of chaos. Stay, stay, stay. I was no longer in control of my own body. I moved, step by step, toward the painting, drawn to it by some invisible force, my feet carrying me across the room without my consent. And as I reached the canvas, my hand lifted as if on its own, pressing against the cool surface of the frame. Crack. A sharp, cracking sound filled the room as the painting began to peel, like paper tearing. The figure of the woman seemed to shift, her form becoming more solid, more real, until she stepped out of the painting completely. Her eyes locked onto mine, dark as the void. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice like ice, sending a chill through my entire body. Before I could react, the room seemed to blur. The walls bent, the floor rippling like water. The air twisted, distorted, and I was no longer in the room I had entered. I was somewhere else, somewhere colder, darker, and infinitely more terrifying. I was standing in the middle of an endless, desolate field, the sky above me swirling with storm clouds. The wind howled around me, sharp and biting. And there, standing in the distance, was the house. My house. But it was different now. Twisted. The ivy that once clung to the walls had turned to thorns, wrapping around the house like a prison. The windows were blackened, like empty eyes staring out into the void. The door hung open, but no light spilled out from within. Just darkness. And in that darkness I could hear it. The sound of breathing. Slow. Steady. It was coming from the house. And it was waiting for me. The wind whipped around me, carrying with it a strange, sickly sweet scent, like rotting flowers mixed with something metallic. I couldn't place it, but it made my stomach churn. The sky above was a storm of swirling clouds, a dark vortex that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, casting the field in a faint, sickly green glow. The air was heavy, thick, with an unnatural stillness that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I could still hear the house calling to me, the same dark hum of whispers, like 1,000 voices lost in the wind. "Come closer. Come closer." My feet moved before I could stop them, drawn towards the house, as if some invisible force was pulling me along the twisted path. Each step felt like it was taking me deeper into the heart of something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries. The ground beneath my feet was soft, uneven, like walking through wet sand, but there was no sound. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs. Just silence. As I got closer to the house, the shadows seemed to grow deeper, almost tangible now, stretching out from the walls like fingers reaching for me. The thorns on the ivy had grown longer, sharp as needles, twisting and curling around each other in a grotesque dance as though alive. I reached the front steps, the wood warped and rotted, creaking under my weight. The door was wide open, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. I hesitated, looking back over my shoulder at the field, at the swirling storm in the sky. But there was nothing. Just an endless expanse of emptiness and the house, dark and looming before me. A gust of wind slammed the door open wider, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Inside, inside." I stepped over the threshold and into the house, my heart hammering in my chest. The air inside was colder than outside, the temperature dropping so sharply that I could see my breath misting in the air. The entryway was unrecognizable, the familiar, comforting details of the house twisted and distorted. The walls seemed to close in on me, bending and warping, like the room itself was alive and shifting. The floor beneath my feet felt slick, wet, though I couldn't see where the moisture was coming from. The soft creaking of the house echoed through the silence. But there was something else now, something far more disturbing. The faint sound of footsteps. Something was moving upstairs. A chill ran down my spine as I instinctively glanced toward the staircase, its dark wooden steps stretching upward into a shadowy void. I could almost hear the soft scrape of nails against the floorboards, a rhythmic scratching sound that sent a shiver crawling through my bones. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to move, unable to breathe. And then I heard it. A whisper right next to my ear.
"Come up." The voice was low, guttural, like it was coming from deep within the walls themselves. My blood turned to ice. I turned quickly, but there was no one behind me. No one in sight. Yet I could feel the presence. It was watching, waiting, its cold, dark eyes upon me. The staircase stretched before me, its steps darkened by shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, slithering and twisting like living things. I could almost feel the weight of the air pushing me toward them, urging me to climb, to reach the top. I took a step forward, then another. The stairs creaked underfoot, each step echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. The darkness above grew thicker, like it was swallowing everything in its path, devouring the light. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping further with each step I took. By the time I reached the top, I could barely feel my fingers. I could barely feel my body. It was as if the cold was seeping into my very soul, freezing me from the inside out. I reached the top of the stairs and found myself standing in front of a long, narrow hallway. The walls were covered in old, peeling wallpaper, the patterns faded and distorted by time. There were doors lining either side of the corridor, each one slightly ajar, their dark interiors hiding untold secrets. And at the far end of the hallway there it was, the room. The door was wide open, the faint light inside flickering like a dying candle, casting long, unsettling shadows on the floor. Something inside the room was calling to me. I couldn't resist. I walked forward, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight as I passed the doors. The whispering grew louder, more urgent now, pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear it all around me, circling me like a swarm of unseen voices, growing in intensity. Come closer. The light in the room flickered again and I pushed the door open, stepping inside. It was a small, empty room. But there, in the center, was a large mirror. The frame was old, ornate, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to twist and shift as I gazed at them, as if the patterns themselves were alive. The mirror's surface was black, reflecting nothing at first, but as I approached, something began to stir. A faint movement, like a shadow passing over the surface of the glass. And then it appeared. It wasn't my reflection. Not exactly. The figure in the mirror was me, but not me. The face staring back at me was pale, hollow-eyed, with a twisted smile that stretched too wide, too far. The figure in the mirror moved, tilting its head slightly as if studying me, its eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, its voice the same low, guttural tone I'd heard before, but it wasn't coming from the mirror. No, it was inside my head, clawing at my thoughts, whispering directly into my mind. My breath hitched in my throat as I stepped back, my hand flying to my chest, where my heart pounded violently against my ribs. The figure in the mirror mirrored my every movement, except for one small detail. Grinned. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind me. My mind raced, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear and confusion. What was happening? What was this place? Why was it so wrong? The whispering surged around me, a crescendo of sound that seemed to reverberate off the walls. It was no longer voices, it was laughter. A deep, mocking laughter, echoing through the room like it came from all directions, trapping me in this nightmare. The door slammed shut behind me. Trapped. Alone. And the figure in the mirror, the thing wearing my face, took a step forward. "You shouldn't have stayed," it said. The room began to pulse with the same rhythmic hum, the walls closing in tighter, suffocating. The air grew thick again as if it were full of something heavy and dark. The temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in short, panicked bursts as I tried to reach for the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle was ice cold to the touch, like the whole house was freezing solid. And then, through the glass of the mirror, I saw it. Something else. Behind the figure that resembled me, a dark shape was moving, twisting, its form shifting and undulating like something in the process of being born. It was enormous, larger than anything I had seen before. Its eyes burned bright, two glowing embers in the darkness, and its shape was a mass of ever-changing limbs, tentacles, and mouths that opened wide in impossible shapes. It was hungry and it was coming for me. I pressed myself back against the wall, frozen. Every part of me wanted to scream, to run, to wake up, because this had to be a dream, a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But it wasn't. The thing in the mirror was still watching me, smiling. That smile, unnatural and wide, reached almost to its ears now. The corners of its mouth tore ever so slightly as it stretched wider, bloodless and raw, but it showed no pain, only pleasure. It was enjoying this. And behind it, the writhing shape, still slowly, deliberately moving, began pressing against the other side of the glass. The mirror creaked under its weight, not shattering, not breaking, just bending like glass wasn't glass anymore, but something soft and pliable. The sound was quiet at first, a low, wet squelch, like something heavy dragging itself across soaked carpet. And then, a tapping. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails on glass. Tap, 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 and then scrape. A long, slow drag of something sharp across the inside of the mirror, as if claws were tracing its surface from within. The sound went straight through me, raising every hair on my body, igniting that ancient primal part of the brain that just knows, you are not safe. I reached again for the door. This time I didn't just pull. I slammed my shoulder into it, over and over, ignoring the splinters that stabbed into my skin, the bruises forming beneath my clothes. I didn't care anymore, I just needed out. Behind me, the mirror let out a low groan. The glass rippled like water now, trembling as if struggling to contain what was behind it. A whisper floated across the room. Not a voice this time. A name. My name. Spoken so softly, so gently, like a lullaby. But it wasn't my own voice that said it. It was my mother's, dead for 5 years. I froze. "Come here, baby," the voice said, thick with emotion, warm and trembling. "It's okay now. I'm here." No. I knew that wasn't her. That wasn't her voice. It was close, too close, but just slightly wrong. like something wearing her memory like a mask, trying it on to see if it would fit. I turned slowly. The mirror had changed. No longer a reflection of the room. Now it was a window. And beyond it, I saw my old childhood bedroom. The faded wallpaper with clouds and paper airplanes. The worn-out stuffed rabbit sitting on the edge of the bed. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, still glowing. And sitting on the bed was her. My mother. She looked just like I remembered. Her eyes tired but kind. Her hands resting in her lap, open. Waiting. But her face was too still. Not a twitch, not a blink. Like a portrait. Trap. "I missed you," the voice said again, but her lips hadn't moved. The voice was in my head. Too loud. Too soft. All at once. And then, like static behind the voice, came something else. A deeper voice. Guttural. It didn't speak in words. Just feeling. A sound that made my stomach turn and my teeth ache. A language not meant for humans. It vibrated through my bones like a tuning fork. The light in the mirror dimmed. My mother's smile melted. Literally. Like wax exposed to heat. Her cheeks began to slide, her jaw drooping open, revealing rows of teeth underneath. Not human teeth. Long, jagged. Yellow. The kind meant for shredding. And then the mirror cracked. Not shattered. Not broken. Just a thin, web-like fracture across the surface. Enough for one thing to slip through. I stumbled back. My legs gave way and I collapsed to the floor as a low, rumbling laugh filled the room, deep and ancient, like the house itself was laughing at me. The crack in the mirror widened, and from it, something slithered through. Not fast, not clumsy, but deliberate. A long, pale arm, impossibly thin and covered in faint, shifting symbols, like ink swimming just beneath the skin. It reached forward, hand groping along the floor, fingers too long and bending the wrong way. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My vision blurred. My ears were ringing. And all I could hear were those whispers, now circling me, wrapping around me like chains. "You opened the door. You looked too long. You let us see you." The hand stopped. And for the first time it turned toward me, truly turned. And I saw its face. No eyes. Just hollow pits that leaked black smoke. And a grin far wider than should have been possible. "Now we're coming through," it said. The mirror exploded. Not with sound, but with silence. Like all noise had been sucked into it. And then, darkness. Silence swallowed everything. Not the comforting kind of silence that wraps you like a blanket at night. No, this was a hollow silence. A hungry silence. Even my heartbeat seemed muted in my chest, like the air itself was too thick, too heavy for sound to travel. I didn't know how long I was out. A second? An hour? Time felt broken, unstitched. Like the hands of a clock had started moving backwards, or sideways. When I finally opened my eyes, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was in a room I didn't recognize. The walls pulsed slightly as though breathing. A dim light flickered overhead. Not electrical, not fire, but something in between, like dying starlight filtered through smoke. The floor was soft. Warm. Wet. I didn't want to look down, but I did. It wasn't carpet. It was skin. Pale and veined, stretching endlessly, with tiny hairline cracks that wept a dark fluid. Every time I shifted, it shivered beneath me. I stood slowly, legs trembling, ears still ringing with those whispers. But they weren't in my head anymore. They were around me. Soft murmurs drifted through the air like fog, just out of reach. Not loud enough to understand, but too clear to ignore. Like a conversation happening just behind a closed door. I took a step. The ground sighed. Ahead, something moved, just a flicker. A shadow darting between two walls that hadn't been there a second ago. The space kept shifting, expanding and contracting like lungs, like it was alive. Watching. Waiting. Then I saw it. A doorway. Not made of wood or glass or metal. Just an arch carved into the fleshy wall. Beyond it, pure blackness. But something about it called to me. Not with sound. With feeling. A pull in the center of my chest. Like a string tied to my heart, slowly being reeled in. Against every instinct, I walked toward it. Because somehow, I knew. If I didn't go to it, it would come to me. The darkness inside the arch wasn't empty. It was thick. Tangible. Like ink in water, swirling just below the surface. I reached out a hand, and it vanished into the dark. No cold, no warmth, just absence. I stepped through, and everything changed. The world inverted. Up was down. Light was dark. Every sound was backward, laughter that sounded like weeping, music like distant screams. I stood in a room identical to the Miller's living room, but wrong. The proportions stretched. The fireplace too tall. The windows too small. The furniture melted into the floor like wax. And on the wall, photos. Dozens of them. But not of the Millers. Of me. At different ages. Different places. Moments I never remembered being photographed. One of me sleeping. One brushing my teeth. One standing alone in a crowd of strangers. All with those same blank smiles and two wide eyes. I turned. And behind me, they stood. The Millers. But also not them. Their eyes now just empty sockets leaking shadows. Their skin slightly translucent, revealing wriggling things beneath. They didn't move. They just stared. Why? I asked. My voice barely a whisper, swallowed by the room. Mrs. Miller tilted her head. To remember you, she said. And then all four of them spoke at once. Their voices layered. Cracked. And human. You were ours the moment you walked in. A willing guest. An offering. A vessel. I stepped back. My spine hit the wall. The photos fluttered to the ground, some of them curling and hissing like they were alive. You didn't run when the lights flickered. You didn't flee when the house changed. You stayed. You looked. You opened the door. And then the worst part. They smiled. And from behind them dozens more figures emerged. All with the same blank stares. Some looked like children. Others had no faces at all. Just smooth skin and twitching heads. A choir of whispers filled the room. Join us. Be part. Be new. Be reborn. The world bent. Reality buckled. And through it all, one thought screamed in my mind. I was never meant to leave that house. I was never a babysitter. I was bait. I closed my eyes, hoping, praying, that this was still a dream. That maybe I had fallen asleep on the Miller's couch. That maybe I'd wake up to the soft static of the television and the scent of popcorn and juice boxes and crayon wax. That maybe everything would be okay. But the whispers didn't stop. And when I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the distorted living room. I was back in the hallway. Only now, it stretched impossibly long. The walls curved inward like ribs. The lights, those dim yellow bulbs overhead, flickered one by one in sequence, leading me forward, like breadcrumbs laid out by something that didn't want to lose its prey. I walked, because what else could I do? Behind me was only darkness. In front of me, at least there was a path. I don't know how long I followed it. Time had lost all meaning. My feet no longer ached. My breath didn't cloud in the air. It was like I'd stepped outside the laws of the world. Eventually the hallway ended, and there waiting was a door. Just like the Miller's front door, but taller, narrower, carved with symbols that moved when I looked too long. I hesitated, then opened it. On the other side was a nursery. Soft pastel walls. A white crib. A mobile of stars and moons spinning gently overhead without wind. Everything pristine. Too pristine. Not a speck of dust. Not a wrinkle in the blanket. The kind of sterile perfection that felt wrong somehow. Like a room prepared for something that never arrived. Or something that wasn't supposed to. And in the crib, a bundle. Wrapped tightly in a pale blue blanket. I stepped closer. The mobile slowed. And then the baby opened its eyes. Except, they weren't eyes. Just swirling black pools. No whites. No irises. Just motionless, bottomless voids. It didn't cry. It smiled. And in that smile I saw everything. I saw the Millers the way they truly were. Monolithic things of bone and shadow and hunger, wearing flesh like formal wear. I saw other neighborhoods, entire towns, replicas filled with perfect families and polite greetings and community potlucks. All built to lure, to comfort, to feed. I saw myself not just standing in that room but in hundreds of rooms. 1,000 futures all branching and twisting. In some I ran. In others I stayed. In a few I changed. And then the baby spoke. Not with words. With a sound. Oh, it. Like the echo of a funeral bell ringing at the bottom of a well. Everything shuddered. The crib cracked. The walls peeled like old wallpaper. And I realized I wasn't in a house anymore. I was inside something. Someplace older than time. A hollow space carved between dimensions. A nursery, yes, but not for human children. A nest. A hatchery. And I had stepped into it. I turned and ran. The hallway was gone. The door had vanished. There was only open space now, an endless plain of shifting colors and tangled roots and lights that pulsed like heartbeats. Shapes moved in the distance, too far to see but close enough to feel. The air itself buzzed with energy, with awareness. Something ancient had noticed me, and it was deciding whether I was worth keeping. I ran until I collapsed. And then, silence. Not the kind from earlier. Not hungry. Just still. And in that stillness, A voice. A child's voice. "Don't be scared," it whispered. "You'll get used to it. We all do." I turned and saw Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah anymore. There was something else now. Something wearing her but no longer pretending. She smiled. And behind her, dozens more children appeared, holding hands, swaying, singing a tune with no melody. They surrounded me. And the darkness rose again. The darkness wasn't empty. It never had been. It pulsed like a living thing, breathing in rhythms I couldn't match. The kind of breath that wasn't about lungs or air. It was older, hungrier, awaiting breath. And in it I floated, not walking, not running, just suspended, like dust caught in sunbeams. Weightless, watching. The children circled me, still holding hands, still humming. But the tune had changed. It was softer now, slower, like a music box winding down. The kind of melody that made your bones ache with forgotten memories. Sarah, or what had once been Sarah, tilted her head. "You don't have to fight it," she said. "You've already come so far." Her voice wasn't menacing. It was comforting. And that made it so much worse. Behind her, Tommy appeared. And then Emma. And even little Noah, the baby I'd fed applesauce to just hours ago, or maybe centuries. Time here was slippery. "You're one of the few who see," Tommy said, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. "That's why we brought you." I tried to speak, but my mouth didn't work. Or maybe I no longer had one. I was becoming unmade. Not destroyed. Not broken. Just slowly peeled away, layer by layer. Like an old photograph fading until only the outline remains. "You're thinking about running again?" Emma said. "That's okay. We all did at first." She reached out, and her fingers melted into long tendrils of light, brushing the space where my cheek should have been. It didn't hurt. It felt like being remembered, and for the first time, I felt tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind you only feel when you know the world you came from is gone. Not destroyed. Just unreachable. Like a train you missed that no longer stops anywhere. "Can I ask something?" I thought, not with lips but from somewhere deeper. Sarah nodded. "Of course." "Why me?" There was a pause. And then, Mr. Miller's voice echoed from nowhere. Warm. Fatherly. Hollow. "Because you noticed, most don't. They sleepwalk through our towns, nod at our smiles, eat our food, sit in our chairs. But you saw the cracks. The masks." The others nodded. "You saw the truth," Mrs. Miller added, stepping into view. Her human form had begun to blur, like a watercolor left out in the rain. Her face still smiled. "And that makes you useful." "Useful how?" "To help prepare the others," Emma said. "For what?" They all spoke in unison, soft, slow, final. The merging. The darkness brightened. Just a little. And now I saw them. Not the Millers. Not the children. But the things behind them. Vast, skeletal silhouettes curled in spirals that defied geometry. Eyes without faces. Limbs that bent the wrong way. Mouths that opened in silence, whispering truths no human should know. They were watching. Not impatiently. Just waiting. Waiting for the last barrier to fall. Waiting for me to choose. And I, still suspended, still unraveling, felt something call. A song. One I couldn't remember learning but now knew by heart. A song of stars blinking out. Of doorways opening inside mirrors. Of streets that looped endlessly in towns with no names. The merging had already begun. And I was a part of it. They say that becoming something else is like death. But it's not. It's slower. Quieter. It's forgetting how your name used to sound when someone who loved you said it. It's realizing your heartbeat has synced to a rhythm that isn't yours. It's feeling comfortable in the presence of monsters. And it's noticing, with a calm that scares you, that they no longer look like monsters at all. I watched as the figures around me began to blend into the walls of the house. The Miller's shapes grew long and smooth like melted wax, seeping into the wallpaper, the floorboards, the very air. Sarah's laugh echoed faintly, as if it were coming from behind the walls now. "Where are you going?" I asked, or maybe just thought. "Nowhere," came the reply from every direction. "We're always here." I looked down. There was no floor. No ceiling. Just a neighborhood suspended in an endless night, stretched thin like the inside of a snow globe. And inside every house, shadows stirred. Behind every curtain, something watched. And in the quiet hum of the street lamps, there was a pulse, like a distant heartbeat, steady, patient, eternal. I began to understand something unsettling. This town wasn't a trap. It was a bridge. A softly humming portal between what was and what would be. and I had crossed it. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. "You're still holding on," Mr. Miller said gently, stepping back into view. His face had changed again. Not monstrous, just wrong. Like someone trying to remember what a person was supposed to look like and getting close, but not close enough. He held out his hand. Not threatening. Inviting. "Let go," he whispered. "We'll show you what's on the other side." Behind him, the children waited. Their eyes glowed with soft light, and they swayed gently as if to a lullaby only they could hear. The air was thick with it, sweet and heavy, like the smell of flowers left too long in the sun. I felt my knees weaken. I wanted to rest. I wanted to forget. But something inside me, small, stubborn, cracked and shaking, held on. A memory. A flicker of my grandmother's voice reading to me under a blanket fort. The way my little brother used to grab my pinky finger and not let go. The taste of summer rain on my tongue when I used to dance in it barefoot. Tiny human things. Frail. But mine. "I'm not ready," I whispered. The air shifted. Not angry. Not disappointed. Just sad. "You will be," Mrs. Miller said softly, her voice already fading. "When the time comes." And just like that, they began to disappear. One by one. Their bodies dissolved into the furniture, into the rugs, into the light fixtures, until all that remained was silence. In the house. Just a house. Dusty. Quiet. Empty. I staggered outside. The air was cool now, the sky filled with stars that didn't seem quite right. Too many of them. Too still. But they were there. I ran. Again. All the way back to the police station. This time I didn't try to explain. I just said the family wasn't home. That I got scared. And they nodded. Just nodded. Like they'd heard this story before. Maybe they had. Maybe they'd lived it. Now I sit here again. Writing this down. Not because I think it will help. Not because I think anyone will listen. But because something inside me still remembers being me. And I know now that won't last forever. They're patient. They're watching. And they don't need to chase anymore. They're already inside. Waiting. For the lights to go out again. It started long before the Millers moved in. Long before the town had a name. Back when the land was just a patch of forest so thick and tangled that compasses refused to work and the birds avoided it altogether. The first settlers, simple folk with hopeful dreams, called it Still Hollow. They cleared the trees, built cabins, raised barns. Planted crops that never quite tasted right. Drank water that left a strange buzzing in their teeth. And they whispered quietly about the shapes they saw in the woods at night. At first it was little things. Missing livestock. Cold spots near doorways. Voices in the wind mimicking loved ones who were miles away. But the people stayed. Because where else could they go? Then came the winter of 1852. The snow arrived early that year. And with it the fog. Thick, soupy, and relentless. People got lost walking 5 feet from their front doors. Whole families disappeared without a trace. But the strangest thing? No one seemed frightened. Just accepting. Even the town records from that time were oddly calm. Matter of fact, entries like, "The Johnsons did not return. Their home now belongs to the fog. Baby born with silver eyes. Named her Grace. The well sings at night. We listen." Then one day the fog lifted. Just like that. The sky returned, bluer than anyone remembered. The birds came back. New settlers arrived. They built new homes. Laid down tidy streets. Put up fences and flower boxes. They called the new town Crescent Hill. But if you dug deep, beneath the fresh pavement, beneath the new names, you'd find the hollow still there. Still hungry. Still whispering. The Millers didn't move in by accident. They were sent. Chosen. You see, the beings that came through, they weren't mindless creatures. They were planners. Architects. They studied. Observed. And when they found Still Hollow, they didn't want to consume it. They wanted to wear it. And they needed vessels. So they picked a family. Gave them forms. Memories. Roles to play. The mother warm and kind. The father strong and steady. The children precocious and sweet. Perfect on the outside. Empty on the inside. Except for the hum. That soft, steady hum of something else inside them. They moved into a house designed like all the others. Smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. But underneath the floorboards, the original timbers remained, soaked with the forgotten breath of the forest. Still echoing the rituals of those early settlers who tried to bargain with the dark. And the Millers smiled. Waited. Watched. One child at a time. One neighbor. One passerby. Until a new girl came to babysit. Until a new pair of eyes saw the cracks. Until you, dear listener, found yourself reading about it. thinking about it, imagining what it must be like. Can you hear it now? That gentle hum? Like a song you almost remember just beyond the edge of sleep. That's how it starts. That's how it spreads. And in the end, when you feel the weight pressing against your window at night, don't be afraid. They only want to show you something. Something beautiful. Something true. Something waiting beneath the surface of the world just like them. And when they finally knock, softly, politely like neighbors do, you won't say no. No one ever does. Before he smiled too wide. Before he blinked too little. Before his voice sounded like it had learned English from listening, not living, there was a boy named Eli. He lived far away from Crescent Hill. A song of stars blinking out. Of doorways opening inside mirrors. Of streets that looped endlessly in towns with no names. The merging had already begun. And I was a part of it. They say that becoming something else is like death. But it's not. It's slower. Quieter. It's forgetting how your name used to sound when someone who loved you said it. It's realizing your heartbeat has synced to a rhythm that isn't yours. It's feeling comfortable in the presence of monsters. And it's noticing, with a calm that scares you, that they no longer look like monsters at all. I watched as the figures around me began to blend into the walls of the house. The Miller's shapes grew long and smooth like melted wax, seeping into the wallpaper, the floorboards, the very air. Sarah's laugh echoed faintly, as if it were coming from behind the walls now. "Where are you going?" I asked, or maybe just thought. "Nowhere," came the reply from every direction. "We're always here." I looked down. There was no floor, no ceiling, just a neighborhood suspended in an endless night, stretched thin like the inside of a snow globe. And inside every house, shadows stirred. Behind every curtain, something watched. And in the quiet hum of the street lamps, there was a pulse, like a distant heartbeat, steady, patient, eternal. I began to understand something unsettling. This town wasn't a trap. It was a bridge. A softly humming portal between what was and what would be. And I had crossed it. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. "You're still holding on," Mr. Miller said gently, stepping back into view. His face had changed again. Not monstrous, just wrong. Like someone trying to remember what a person was supposed to look like and getting close, but not close enough. He held out his hand. Not threatening. Inviting. "Let go," he whispered. "We'll show you what's on the other side." Behind him, the children waited. Their eyes glowed with soft light, and they swayed gently as if to a lullaby only they could hear. The air was thick with it, sweet and heavy, like the smell of flowers left too long in the sun. I felt my knees weaken. I wanted to rest. I wanted to forget. But something inside me, small, stubborn, cracked and shaking, held on. A memory. A flicker of my grandmother's voice reading to me under a blanket fort. The way my little brother used to grab my pinky finger and not let go. The taste of summer rain on my tongue when I used to dance in it barefoot. Tiny human things. Frail. But mine. "I'm not ready," I whispered. The air shifted. Not angry. Not disappointed. Just sad. "You will be," Mrs. Miller said softly, her voice already fading. "When the time comes." And just like that, they began to disappear. One by one. Their bodies dissolved into the furniture, into the rugs, into the light fixtures, until all that remained was silence. In the house. Just a house. Dusty. Quiet. Empty. I staggered outside. The air was cool now, the sky filled with stars that didn't seem quite right. Too many of them. Too still. But they were there. I ran. Again. All the way back to the police station. This time I didn't try to explain. I just said the family wasn't home. That I got scared. And they nodded. Just nodded. Like they'd heard this story before. Maybe they had. Maybe they'd lived it. Now I sit here again. Writing this down. Not because I think it will help. Not because I think anyone will listen. But because something inside me still remembers being me. And I know now that won't last forever. They're patient. They're watching. And they don't need to chase anymore. They're already inside. Waiting. For the lights to go out again. It started long before the Millers moved in. Long before the town had a name. Back when the land was just a patch of forest so thick and tangled that compasses refused to work and the birds avoided it altogether. The first settlers, simple folk with hopeful dreams, called it Still Hollow. They cleared the trees, built cabins, raised barns. Planted crops that never quite tasted right. Drank water that left a strange buzzing in their teeth. And they whispered, quietly, about the shapes they saw in the woods at night. At first, it was little things. Missing livestock. Cold spots near doorways. Voices in the wind, mimicking loved ones who were miles away. But the people stayed, because where else could they go? Then came the winter of 1852. The snow arrived early that year, and with it the fog. Thick, soupy, and relentless. People got lost walking 5 feet from their front doors. Whole families disappeared without a trace. But the strangest thing? No one seemed frightened, just accepting. Even the town records from that time were oddly calm. Matter of fact, entries like, "The Johnsons did not return. Their home now belongs to the fog. Baby born with silver eyes. Named her Grace. The well sings at night. We listen." Then one day the fog lifted. Just like that. The sky returned, bluer than anyone remembered. The birds came back. New settlers arrived. They built new homes, laid down tidy streets, put up fences and flower boxes. They called the new town Crescent Hill. But if you dug deep, beneath the fresh pavement, beneath the new names, you'd find the hollow still there. Still hungry. Still whispering. The Millers didn't move in by accident. They were sent. Chosen. You see, the beings that came through, they weren't mindless creatures. They were planners. Architects. They studied. Observed. And when they found still hollow, they didn't want to consume it. They wanted to wear it. And they needed vessels. So they picked a family. Gave them forms. Memories. Roles to play. The mother warm and kind. The father strong and steady. The children precocious and sweet. Perfect on the outside. Empty on the inside. Except for the hum. That soft, steady hum of something else inside them. They moved into a house designed like all the others. Smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. But underneath the floorboards, the original timbers remained, soaked with the forgotten breath of the forest. Still echoing the rituals of those early settlers who tried to bargain with the dark. And the Millers smiled, waited, watched, one child at a time, one neighbor, one passerby, until a new girl came to babysit, until a new pair of eyes saw the cracks, until you, dear listener, found yourself reading about it, thinking about it, imagining what it must be like. Can you hear it now? That gentle hum? Like a song you almost remember just beyond the edge of sleep. That's how it starts. That's how it spreads. And in the end, when you feel the weight pressing against your window at night, don't be afraid. They only want to show you something. Something beautiful. Something true. Something waiting beneath the surface of the world just like them. And when they finally knock, softly, politely like neighbors do, you won't say no. No one ever does. Before he smiled too wide. Before he blinked too little. Before his voice sounded like it had learned English from listening, not living, there was a boy named Eli. He lived far away from Crescent Hill. A flicker. Something ancient inside her woke up and said, "Not yet." Layla's knees trembled against the cold wood floor, but she didn't fall. Not fully. Not yet. That spark, faint as it was, spread quietly through her, like a single ember clinging to dry leaves. Her mind felt splintered, yes, but not lost. Not completely. In the suffocating stillness, in the sea of wrongness around her, Layla found one small corner of herself untouched. A childhood memory. A moment. Her mother brushing her hair under the yellow kitchen light, humming an old lullaby. Soft, warm, human. She clung to that memory like a lifeline. As the Miller children moved closer, bodies wrong, eyes gleaming with something ancient, Layla whispered the tune under her breath. One note at a time. And something shifted. Not in them. In the house. A distant creak. A groan like floorboards straining under weight they shouldn't have to bear. The walls shivered. Sarah stopped walking. Her head tilted. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice no longer sweet. Layla just kept humming. Her voice steadied, grew clearer. A lullaby her mother sang when storms rattled the windows and shadows felt too loud. The moment she let it rise in her chest, the children winced, as if the sound scraped against something raw inside them. Mrs. Miller appeared in the doorway behind them, her face no longer pretending. The mask had slipped, revealing something beneath, skin too pale, lips barely formed, eyes too deep and dark to belong to anything that once walked in daylight. "Enough," she hissed. "Stop that noise." But Layla didn't. She couldn't. The melody carried something in it, something pure, something old, older than the things that wore the Miller's skin. Older even than their cold, crawling hunger. She stood, slowly, humming still, the sound vibrating softly through the air like the ringing of a tuning fork. The walls cracked. Not loudly but definitively, as if they had always been fragile beneath the paint. The puzzle box on the desk buzzed. Not in harmony, but in protest. And Layla understood then. It wasn't a container. It was a key. Or a lock. And the song, her memory, was the only thing it didn't recognize. Tommy fell to the floor, clutching his ears. Sarah backed into the hallway, her features melting slightly, her face smeared like paint in the rain. Mrs. Miller shrieked, a warbled, broken sound, but Layla stepped forward, humming. Room by room, the house unraveled. The corners pulled back, exposing not wood or plaster but black tendrils, twitching like roots yanked from the earth. And somewhere deep beneath the floor, something groaned in fury. Layla didn't stop. She walked through the collapsing illusion, through the shuddering halls of flesh and lies. The front door reappeared, not clean and white as before, but ancient, wooden, carved with symbols that shimmered as she passed. The outside world blinked back into being. The stars were wrong in the sky, but the air smelled real. She reached for the handle, cold and solid beneath her palm, and turned it. But before she stepped through, she turned back. Just once. Sarah stood at the end of the hallway, small and broken, her shape flickering like a candle about to go out. "We could have made you better," she said softly. "You were almost ready." Layla didn't answer. She closed the door gently behind her. The door clicked shut behind her with an eerie finality, but Layla didn't linger in the moment of escape. She ran. The street outside was bathed in the cold light of a waning moon, its pale glow stretching across the pavement like a thin veil. But there was something off about the night. The air felt too still, as if even the wind had been silenced in fear. As if the world itself held its breath, waiting for something that Layla couldn't quite name. She didn't stop to look back at the house. She had already seen enough to know that it wasn't just the Millers she had to worry about. That thing, that hollow shape wearing their skin, was only the beginning. And if she didn't do something quickly, there would be others. More houses, more families, more faces, all wrong, all waiting. Layla's breath hitched as the memories flooded her mind, their eyes so dark and hungry, the way they had spoken of expansion, how they had laughed. The things in that house weren't human, not by any stretch of the imagination, but they were taking human forms, taking human lives. And in their wake, there would be nothing left but hollow shells. She couldn't let that happen. Her first step took her to the police station. Her hands gripped the sides of her jacket, pulling it tighter around her. She hadn't thought this through, had she? What was she even going to say? "I saw some monsters in the Miller's house?" No, they wouldn't believe her. They never did. They hadn't before. But maybe she could find someone who had seen the same signs. Someone who knew. Inside the station, she was met with the usual cold reception. Officers at their desks, glancing up briefly before returning to whatever it was they'd been doing. The world here felt normal. That was what terrified her the most. Everything was fine on the surface. But Layla couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was fine. "I need to speak with Officer Daniels," Layla said, her voice low, insistent. One of the officers glanced up but didn't move. "Officer Daniels isn't available right now," he said, his voice flat. "Can I help you with something?" Layla's heart pounded against her ribcage. She had to press on, had to make them understand. "No, it's urgent. Please, it's about the Millers." The mention of the Millers' name made him pause. His eyes flickered to the side, and for a brief moment, Layla thought she saw something in his expression. Something that wasn't quite right. He cleared his throat, stood up, and motioned for her to follow. The office behind him was dimly lit, a file cabinet against the wall stacked with paperwork. It smelled of stale coffee and old newspapers. Officer Daniels was sitting behind his desk, reviewing some papers, but when he looked up at Layla, something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. "You were the babysitter, weren't you?" he asked, his tone strange, like he already knew more than he should. "Yeah," Layla answered, hesitating. She had to tell him everything. She opened her mouth, but the words came out in a whisper, too fast and jumbled to make any sense. Daniels leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if he was trying to place something. "What exactly happened there, Layla?" Layla swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising panic in her chest. "They're not human," she said finally, the words tasting strange on her tongue. "The Millers, the children, they're not real. They're something else." His expression didn't change. It was almost too neutral. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but it wasn't comforting. It was as if he was studying her, as if he already knew how to handle her panic. And the worst part? He didn't seem surprised by it. "I see," he said after a long pause. "You should go home, Layla. Get some rest. You're clearly not well. Maybe you should talk to someone." Layla's heart dropped. There was something wrong with his voice, with the way he said it. She'd seen this before, dismissal. But there was no comfort in it now. The world felt hollow again, like they already knew. "You don't believe me," she said, barely above a whisper. Daniel stood and came around the desk. "I believe you're under a lot of stress, Layla. Maybe it's time you take a break from this. You've been through something difficult, but..." But before he could finish his sentence, the door to the office burst open with a sharp bang, and another officer rushed in, breathless. "Daniels, we need you right away, it's about the Millers." The officer's voice trailed off as he looked at Layla, his eyes scanning her face for a split second too long. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Forget her," Daniels snapped, his tone suddenly cold. "We'll handle it." But Layla had already seen it. She had seen the flicker in their eyes. The same blankness that had been in the Millers. Something had changed, something that none of them were willing to admit. Layla turned and ran. She ran out of the station and into the night, knowing what she had to do. The officers, the town, they weren't going to help. She had to face this on her own, had to stop the others before they spread. There was no time to waste. As she reached the edge of town, she glanced at the moon once more. And something inside her hardened. The Millers weren't the only ones. They weren't the only family hiding a monster beneath their skin. The ones who had been watching, waiting, had already begun to multiply. The war had started, and Layla had no choice but to fight back. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet street, steady, resolute. There were others out there too, wearing human faces, and Layla would find them. She would stop them no matter the cost. The world, it seemed, was full of monsters now. And Layla, the girl who had once been lost in a perfect world, would be the one to destroy them. Layla's mind raced as she moved through the shadowed streets. She had to stop the others, those who wore human faces and lived in human houses. But how? What could she possibly do against something so vast, so insidious? The knowledge she'd gathered from the Miller's study, those cold, calculated notes about interdimensional colonization, kept swirling in her thoughts. The humans suspect nothing. She shuddered as she thought of those words. They hadn't just come for one family. They were taking over everything. They were replacing people piece by piece. Her footsteps quickened as she made her way to the town's old library. The building loomed in front of her, quiet and foreboding. She needed information. She needed to understand what she was up against. Inside, the musty smell of old paper and leather filled the air. The place was deserted, save for a lone librarian who sat hunched over a desk, the dim glow of a desk lamp illuminating her face. Layla didn't have time to waste on pleasantries. She went straight to the back section where the rare and obscure books were kept. There, in the far corner of the library, a locked wooden cabinet sat. She had passed it many times before, wondering what secrets it held. Now it was her only hope. The glass doors creaked as she pulled them open, revealing rows of books that seemed to whisper with a life of their own. Layla's fingers brushed the spines, scanning the titles. A cold chill crept up her spine when she spotted a book that seemed to call to her, as if it had been waiting for her to find it. Its cover was faded, the title nearly illegible, but Layla's instincts told her this was it. She pulled the book free and hurried to a nearby table. It was another guide, much like the one she'd found in the Miller's house. But this one was different. The language was more complex, filled with diagrams that seemed to shift as she looked at them. Layla flipped through the pages, her breath catching in her throat as the diagrams became clearer. The book described the process of colonization in painstaking detail. The creatures could take over any body, any mind, by entering through the smallest of cracks in the psyche. The process wasn't instantaneous, it was slow, methodical. First, the creatures would replace the soul of the person, changing them bit by bit until there was nothing left but an empty shell. Then they would move on, spreading to the next. And the more of them there were, the harder it would be to recognize who was truly human. Layla's stomach churned as she read. She knew the Millers had already undergone this process. She had seen the signs, the way they acted, the way they spoke. But if they had already begun, there was no telling how many more families had been infected. She couldn't do this alone. A plan began to form in her mind. If she could find the source of the creature's power, if she could learn how to stop them, then maybe she could save what was left of the town. The library was full of hidden knowledge. Surely there was something here that could help her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She quickly shoved the book into her bag and turned, only to freeze as the librarian appeared, standing silently in the doorway. "Can I help you with something?" the librarian asked, her voice soft but tinged with something otherworldly, a strange resonance that set Layla's teeth on edge. Layla's heart skipped a beat. She knew. Of course she knew. The librarian's eyes flickered, her pupils dilating unnaturally wide, a predatory gleam in them. "Is this about the Millers?" the librarian asked, her lips curling into a thin smile. You've come a long way, dear, but you're too late. Layla's pulse hammered in her throat. She knew the librarian wasn't human, just like the officers, just like the Millers. The realization made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She couldn't fight them all, not like this. She had to escape. In a swift motion, Layla grabbed the book from her bag and ran. She didn't look back. The librarian's voice, soft and amused, echoed behind her, but Layla didn't stop. The library's doors were ahead, and she could see the dim light of the street beyond them. The night air hit her face like a slap when she burst outside. But even in the open street, she felt no relief. She could still sense them, the creatures, waiting, watching. She needed help. She couldn't fight them alone. There had to be others, people who had noticed the changes, who could stand with her. But where could she find them? Who could she trust? The book in her hands felt like the heaviest thing in the world. The more she turned it over in her hands, the more she realized just how much she had to learn. But there was no time to study it in peace. The creatures were everywhere, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She needed to act. She needed to do something before it was too late. In the distance, the moon hung like a silent sentinel above the town. And as Layla stood there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her, she knew that the time for hiding was over. The fight had begun, and she would be at the center of it, whether she was ready or not. She turned on her heel and headed toward the nearest house, one she had passed by countless times. The Johnsons' house. She knew the Johnsons. They were good people. But they had been quiet lately. Too quiet. Layla clenched her jaw. There was no more time for doubt. She had to find out if the Johnsons had been taken too. If she could stop them, maybe she could stop the others from spreading. As she approached their door, she steeled herself. The creatures were everywhere now, and soon the town would be overrun. But Layla wasn't about to let that happen. With the weight of the book heavy in her hands, she knocked on the Johnsons' door. Her heart raced as the seconds stretched out into an eternity. The door opened slowly, and Layla's breath caught in her throat as she came face to face with Mrs. Johnson. Or at least what looked like Mrs. Johnson. Her face was blank, too perfect, her eyes far too empty. "I was wondering when you would come," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice too smooth, too calm. And just like that, Layla knew. She wasn't just up against one family anymore. The invasion was bigger than that. The war for humanity had begun, and Layla was ready to fight back. As Mrs. Johnson stood there, her smile unblinking and unnatural, Layla's heart pounded in her chest. The oppressive silence stretched between them, and Layla could feel the weight of the situation sinking in. She wasn't just knocking on the door of a house. She was knocking on the door of something far more sinister. "Come inside, Layla," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice laced with an eerie sweetness. "We've been expecting you." Layla's mind raced. Expecting me? She hadn't even realized the depth of her mistake. The creatures had been watching her all along, waiting for the right moment to pull her in, to make her one of them. But she wasn't ready to give in yet. Not now, not ever. "I don't think I will," Layla said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'm here to stop you." For a moment, there was a flicker in Mrs. Johnson's eyes, a brief flash of something like irritation, but it was gone before Layla could fully process it. "Oh, Layla," Mrs. Johnson purred, taking a step closer. "You're so brave. So foolish." The words were laced with venom, but her tone remained almost affectionate, like she was speaking to a wayward child. Layla took a step back, the air around her thick with tension. She had to think quickly. If Mrs. Johnson had been replaced, then the rest of her family was likely compromised too. She could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She needed to find out who else had been taken, before they found her. "I'll never join you," Layla said, though she couldn't suppress the shiver running down her spine. "You won't win." Mrs. Johnson's smile deepened, her eyes gleaming with something darker now. She tilted her head as if considering Layla's words. "We don't need you to join us, dear. You're already one of us. You just don't know it yet." The chill in the air seemed to intensify as Mrs. Johnson stepped forward again, her movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Layla took another step back, but this time she didn't retreat further. She had to stand her ground. She had the book. She had the knowledge. But she needed to get out of here fast before the whole house came alive with them. Then, like a sudden burst of clarity, it hit her. The book, the diagrams. There had been something about weak points, about breaking the connection, severing the hold these creatures had on their human hosts. She just needed to find a way to use that knowledge. But she couldn't do it alone. "Mrs. Johnson," Layla said, her voice steady now, her heart still racing. "You're not Mrs. Johnson anymore. You're not even human." A low, guttural laugh escaped from Mrs. Johnson, her eyes narrowing. Such determination. It's almost endearing. But you're wrong. We're better than humans. We're stronger. We're evolving. At that moment, Layla knew. She wasn't just battling a family or a town. She was up against an entire new species. One that had learned how to mask itself, how to hide in plain sight, how to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. And they weren't stopping. Not until every person in town had been replaced. Layla's mind raced as she glanced around. She couldn't afford to waste time. She needed to get back to the library to study the book more closely to figure out how to fight back. But she couldn't just leave the Johnsons' house without knowing if they had more secrets hidden inside. There had to be something she could use, something that could give her the upper hand. I'm not going to stand here and let you take everything, Layla said, more to herself than to Mrs. Johnson. She was trying to convince herself that this was still worth it, that she still had a chance to stop this madness. Mrs. Johnson's smile faltered just for a second before returning with a disturbing, slow creep. You'll see. You'll all see. Suddenly, Layla felt the air grow thick, pressing against her skin. The house seemed to breathe around her, the walls seemingly shifting. The world outside seemed to blur, as if the very boundaries of reality were beginning to warp. Layla knew, with a sinking feeling, that she was losing the fight. They were closing in on her. But then, like a distant voice breaking through the fog, she heard something. A faint sound, almost imperceptible at first, but growing louder by the second. Footsteps. And not just any footsteps. She knew those steps. They were the steady, confident steps of someone who wouldn't be easily deceived, someone who would stand by her side. Tyler. Tyler, her childhood friend, the one person she'd known would never be fooled by a perfect smile. He had figured it out long before she had. She just hadn't realized how deeply he'd been involved in this fight. The door creaked open behind her, and there he stood, Tyler, his expression grim but resolute. You're not alone in this, he said, his voice calm despite the tense situation. He glanced at Mrs. Johnson, his eyes dark with understanding. None of us are. Layla couldn't hide the relief that flooded through her. Tyler had been tracking the changes too. They had been working in secret, piecing things together in the shadows. Let's get out of here, Tyler said, his voice low and urgent. We've got a lot of work to do. But just as they turned toward the door, Layla felt a searing pain in her chest. A sharp, twisting sensation that nearly made her collapse. The creature inside Mrs. Johnson had sensed her vulnerability. It was too late. It was already too late. The entire house seemed to pulse with energy, its once comforting walls now closing in on her like a trap. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her grin widening. You're not going anywhere, child. You never were. Tyler lunged toward Layla, pulling her into his arms as the walls around them shook violently. But just before everything erupted into chaos, Layla heard a sound, a high-pitched, shrill wail, from deep within the house. It was the unmistakable cry of something new, something born from this twisted, interdimensional force. The battle had just begun. The sound of the wail echoed through the house, so loud and unsettling it seemed to shake the very foundation beneath their feet. It wasn't just a cry, it was a signal, a rallying call. Layla's heart raced, her breath shallow as she and Tyler stumbled backward. The walls trembled again, and she could feel the air around them grow colder, heavier. It was as though the house itself had become sentient, alive with the sinister presence of the creatures inside. Tyler's grip on her tightened. We need to move now, he hissed, urgency in his voice. Layla nodded, but her mind was clouded with fear and confusion. The wail had come from deep within the house, somewhere in the basement, perhaps. And with it, a wave of dark energy seemed to pulse from the very walls, seeping into their bodies. She felt a sharp, gnawing sensation in her mind, as if something were trying to worm its way into her thoughts. She shook her head, trying to focus. What's in the basement? She whispered, her voice trembling. Tyler hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the darkened hallway. I don't know, but we're not going down there. Not without more help. Layla's gaze darted to the door. Help from who? But before Tyler could respond, they heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the hallway behind them. Layla turned just in time to see Mrs. Johnson's figure silhouetted in the doorway, her form distorted and shuddering as the creature inside her shifted and pulsed, adapting to whatever twisted purpose it had in mind. You think you can escape? Mrs. Johnson's voice was unnervingly calm, her tone almost pitying. There's no running from us. We're already inside. Tyler moved quickly, pulling Layla toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening crash before they could reach it. Layla spun around, eyes wide with panic. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't the only one blocking their way now. The hallway was filled with shadows, long and serpentine, stretching unnaturally toward them. More figures emerged, pale and lifeless, their eyes dull and hollow, the others. All those who had once lived in this town, now nothing more than empty vessels for the invasion. Layla's chest tightened as her mind raced. There had to be a way out. A way to stop them. The book, the notes, it had all led her here. But the creatures were closing in, and the air grew thick with the scent of something rotten, like the very essence of decay. "I won't let you take her," Tyler said, his voice fierce. He stepped forward, a protective barrier between Layla and the oncoming tide of darkness. Layla glanced around, searching desperately for something, anything that could give them an edge. That's when her eyes landed on the fireplace, a massive stone structure, dark and ancient. She remembered what she'd read in the book. Fire, light, anything that could disrupt the dark energy the creatures thrived on. But there was no time to be certain. Tyler looked back at her. "You've got a plan, right?" Layla hesitated for just a moment, fear creeping in, but she pushed it aside. "I think I do." She grabbed a nearby chair and, with a grunt of effort, hurled it into the fireplace. The sound of it crashing against the stone echoed through the room, followed by a cascade of sparks. Tyler's eyes widened as he saw the embers burst into life, the flames flickering as though alive themselves. "Now!" Layla shouted. Tyler didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby lamp and threw it into the fire, the flames leaping higher as the oil splashed out. A brilliant, blinding light filled the room, cutting through the darkness, and for a moment, Layla felt the oppressive energy falter. The creatures recoiled, hissing in pain. But it wasn't enough. The house seemed to tremble violently, the walls groaning as though they were being pulled apart. Layla's chest tightened, and she felt the weight of the situation pressing in on her. They couldn't keep this up for long. "We need to get to the basement," Layla said urgently, her voice low and frantic. "Whatever they're planning, it's down there." Tyler nodded, his face grim. He grabbed Layla's hand and pulled her toward the hallway, toward the stairs that led down into the dark depths of the house. They moved quickly, the sound of their hurried footsteps echoing in the silence. As they descended the stairs, the air grew colder, heavier. The smell of rot and decay grew stronger. Layla's heart pounded in her chest. Every step felt like it was pulling them deeper into a nightmare. At the bottom of the stairs they found a door, a large wooden door, its edges warped and twisted. The lock had been broken, and the door hung ajar, revealing nothing but a deep, suffocating darkness beyond. Layla's pulse quickened. The basement was worse than she could have imagined. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. She stepped forward, Tyler at her side. As they entered the basement, the door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into complete darkness. Layla fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she activated the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating the cold stone walls and the shelves lined with jars and books. But it wasn't the shelves that caught Layla's attention. At the far end of the room, in the center of the floor, something moved. It was an outline, a shape that wasn't quite human, but it was too big to be anything else. Something, or someone, was in the middle of the basement, and it was growing. Tyler stepped closer, his hand reaching for something in his jacket pocket. "We're not alone," he whispered. Then the shape stirred. Layla's stomach turned as she realized that whatever it was, it had been waiting for them. Waiting for her. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The figure in the corner shifted, growing more solid with each passing moment, and the air grew colder. Every inch closer felt like a step deeper into the void. Tyler's hand found hers, his grip firm but shaky. "This is it, Layla," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "This is where it ends." But Layla wasn't so sure. There was something in the way the figure moved. Something familiar. As the shadows pulled back, a face emerged, pale, twisted, and unmistakably human, yet not. The eyes were wide, empty, almost pleading. "Layla," the creature rasped, its voice a distorted echo of her own mother's. "You're too late." The words sent a chill down her spine. Too late? But the creature's face softened into something that almost resembled a smile. She recoiled, taking a step back. Tyler moved between her and the creature. "Stay away from her," he shouted. Layla's mind spun as her heart sank. "Sir, it's my mom," she thought. But it's not. It can't be. "Mom?" Layla's voice trembled, unsure. "Is it really you?" The creature's head tilted like it was savoring the words. "I was her once, but now, I am something more. And so are you, Layla. We are meant to join the others, to become whole." "No!" Layla whispered, the realization dawning like a horrible weight on her chest. No, I won't join you. The creature's smile widened and it lunged forward, too fast for Layla to react. The world seemed to slow as Tyler shouted, pushing Layla out of the way. But it wasn't fast enough. The thing had already caught him, its cold, twisted fingers digging into his flesh. Layla screamed, but it was too late. Tyler's body contorted unnaturally as the creature consumed him, absorbing him into its own form, twisting his features until they were indistinguishable from the other horrors. The process was agonizing to watch, but Layla couldn't look away. Tyler's face melted, becoming one with the monstrous shape. Her heart ached, but she couldn't grieve. Not now. Not with the world hanging by a thread. The creature turned back to her, its eyes now mocking. You can't stop it, Layla. The others are already here. It's only a matter of time before you join us too. But Layla didn't listen. She couldn't. All she had now was the memory of her mother's voice, the way it used to sound. The warmth, the love. And she wasn't going to let that go, no matter the cost.